Okay, so now that we've finished looking at genetics and heredity, where we have the chromosomes carrying the genes, and some of the genes being dominant and expressed in a new individual, some being recessive and maybe not expressed until two recessives come together, what we want to do is we want to look at the whole idea of procreation, the whole idea of producing children, and how this new generation comes about from parents. Okay, I suppose the reproductive system itself is totally dedicated to the formation of gametes and their union. Okay, so if you remember from the previous class, we were dealing with gametes, and gametes are nothing more than cells in the body, special cells, that have half the normal amount of genetic information, so half the number of chromosomes, but also on their own are of no use. They have to join together to re-establish the 46 chromosomes, so that these 46 chromosomes then can get the cell to keep dividing until they produce a new individual. So we're going to look at sexual reproduction, particularly in humans, okay? And it involves, as we said already, two parents. Now, we did this in the beginning of the last chapter when we spoke about two types of reproduction. The sexual reproduction, which involves the fusion of gametes, one from the male, one from the female. And we talked about asexual reproduction, where you can simply bud off a parent, or you can break a piece off and put it into rooting powder and get it to root, or you can fragment something, and so on. Okay, binary fission is another way by which one bacterial cell just breaks into two. But when we have sexual reproduction, the reason why we focus on that is because it's only through sexual reproduction that variation comes into nature. Okay, subtle changes between members of the same species. So although we're all humans, we belong to the one species, we're all very, very different. And the reason for that is genetics. Okay, the reason for that is because of the genes that come from your mother, the genes that come from your father, combining at the moment of fertilization to give rise to a new but slightly different individual to the two parents. So there's the two symbols, we had those before. Both parents make gametes, which contain half the genetic material of a new human being. The female gamete is called the egg, and the male gamete is the sperm. Now, this is usually the case in all I suppose living animals. The female gamete is the egg and the male gamete is the sperm. Now you might notice that when we're dealing with the symbols of male and female, we're dealing with symbols like this. Okay, that tells us that the male gamete is the motile one. Motile meaning moving. It's the one that runs to the egg. Now the egg is pushed along. The egg moves, but not by itself. Okay, it does move because it's pushed along the fallopian tube, but it's the sperm cell itself that is motile and that swims towards the egg cell, and its only job is to fuse with the egg cell. Okay, about 98% of them die on the journey. Maybe 2% make it to the place where fertilization is to take place, but only one actually fertilizes the egg to produce a new individual. Okay, so there's an idea of what the moment of fertilization looks like. We have the egg, the large cell, which we would call a non-motile cell, surrounded then by the sperm cells there that are the motile ones, look like tadpoles. Okay, so two gametes will fuse in a process called fertilization. So far so good, we understand all this, this is fine. So there you have the egg, and there you have the sperm cells that make it, roughly as we said before, between 1% and 2% of the sperm cells that are actually released make it towards the egg, and only one of them actually breaks through the barrier of the egg in order to deliver half the genetic information from the father into the cell, where half of the genetic information from the mother is waiting to refuse at fertilization to produce, I hope you remember the name, beginning with Z, a zygote. Good, okay. And the zygote is the immediate result of fertilization, okay? So the zygote itself is only one cell. As soon as that cell, there's your zygote, as soon as that cell divides into two like this, it's no longer a zygote, but an embryo. Okay, so sperm, egg, fertilization, zygote. But as soon as that zygote divides into 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, you have an embryo. And then when the embryo reaches a certain type of development, a fairly decent amount of development, we have the baby, the fetus. Okay. The zygote develops into an embryo, and over 9 months the embryo will develop into a fetus, which then, as we know, will be born as a new individual the baby itself. Okay, problem with my slides. So this is the moment of fertilization here. There's the sperm cell from the father, there's the egg cell from the mother, and when both of them fuse, you get the zygote as the immediate result of fertilization. Now, as I told you already, the zygote is only one cell. But as that cell begins to divide and divide, you get an embryo. And the embryo then keeps developing until it forms the baby. Okay, so you start off basically as two half cells which come together as one cell. The one then divides into many cells. That's what an embryo is. It's a very early stage where there's a lot of cells, but they're not differentiated. So you can't tell where the brain is or where the feet are or where the eyes are going to be. You can just tell that there's a lump of cells, a clump of cells. Okay, still a person. As soon as the egg and the sperm meet, there's a person formed, a new unique individual that has variations from the two parents it comes from. So it has to be treated with respect and treated with care. So the embryo then develops over usually about 9 months is the journey. And that's only an average figure, but usually about 9 months into the child, which then is born and learns to live over the next 18 years as an independent person. And then into adulthood, and then, please God, in adulthood, they will then produce the next generation of offspring. So reproduction is a way by which a species is able to propagate itself or push itself down through time, generation after generation. Now, when does a human person know that their bodies are ready for reproduction? There's a stage in everybody's life called puberty, okay? And puberty is nothing more than a release of hormones into the human body that causes dramatic changes on every part of the body, from height and weight and speech and everything else, okay? But the one thing about puberty is it's a hormonal event. Now, what's a hormone, you might ask? A hormone is a very, very special chemical, okay? But it's a chemical usually released by the brain that triggers the body into a long-lasting and permanent change. So when we talk about puberty and hormones, we talk about the release of a hormone, usually from the base of the brain, into the blood, which then clicks the body into thinking, oh, time to move from a child to an adult, time to get ready for procreation, time to get ready for reproduction, okay? And there are puberty events in males, puberty events in females that we look at in detail in a moment, but they're all controlled by hormones. That's the key thing. The hormone that makes a boy a man and the hormone that makes a girl a woman are two different hormones, and we'll speak about those in a moment. Puberty, as we said already, is the age at which young people reach sexual maturity. Now, what that means is that the body is reaching a stage where it says, okay, I'm ready in order to start reproduction. But age-wise, 12, 11, 13, 14, we're not physically ready, we're not emotionally ready. So therefore, it's a time in life when the body changes from being a boy or a girl that is not sexually mature into a man or a woman that is sexually mature, okay? And these changes, as we said already, are controlled by hormones. Okay, I've got a problem with my... It's not working. Okay, there we go. It occurs at different times for different people, and it is triggered by a special chemical called a hormone. Now, there is a little gland in the back of the head called the pituitary gland, and that pituitary gland is only the size of a pea, and it triggers puberty, okay? Testosterone is what causes puberty in boys, and estrogen is what causes puberty in girls. Now, what the brain does is the brain sends out a message, time for puberty. It then causes the male body to produce testosterone that brings about the male changes. It then tells the female body to release estrogen, which brings about the female changes, okay? But it's all triggered in the first instance by the brain itself. So in the males, it occurs somewhere between 12 and 14. And again, these are kind of guideline years. Sometimes it can occur before, sometimes it can occur afterwards, but in between 12 and 14 years of age, usually marked by a rapid growth spurt. So normally you'll notice that people between 12 and 14 years in the second year, they normally shoot up. They might come in to first year at a certain height and then go away into summer holidays and come back in second year, and they've grown, okay? Because the body is developing, body's getting ready. Deepening of the voice, enlargement of the muscles, growth of hair on the face and on the body, and the enlargement of the penis and the testes. Now, they are the organs that will be used in reproduction. We'll talk more about those later on. But the other one, the deepening of the voice, what happens there? The little voice box, when it gets hit by testosterone, widens and elongates and gets bigger. So the voice gets deeper because the voice is beginning to sound more hollow. The voice box begins to open and begins to elongate, so the voice deepens. Okay, that's normally when you hear about the voice breaking. Some people can be up here, then down here, then back up again. When the voice is breaking, their voice is all over the place. Okay, enlargement of the muscles. We're going from boyhood to manhood, so there's a change in the muscle tone and a change in the enlargement of the muscles of the body. Usually that's where the growth spurt takes place. Growth of hair on the face and of the body. That's when you notice you start getting whiskers, or you start getting a bit of what we would say hair around face and so on. And then the enlargement of the penis and the testes, which are involved in reproduction themselves. Okay, now there's the pituitary gland over here. See it in the head. And what it does is it sends a hormone into the body. Then it triggers, now testosterone, the hormone we spoke about before, that's formed in the testes. That's why it's called testosterone. Testosterone. Okay, and it's made in the testes. So the pituitary gland sends out a hormone into the blood then brings the hormone down to the testes, tells them to make testosterone, then the testes send the testosterone into the body, and the puberty changes take place. There's the male reproductive system. Now let's take a look at this. We need to look at this in detail because we need to understand the various different bits and pieces. It's like if you're taking a person and cut them through the middle. All right. So first of all, as we said already, you've got the testes. The testes are down here. And the testes have one job, and that's to make sperm cells, to make gametes. Okay, so the gametes are made out here. Now, you'll notice that the testes are held outside the body. See that? And the reason why they're held outside the body in what we call the scrotum is because the testes only operate at temperatures that are less than 37 degrees, which is normal body temperature. Okay, so they can't be inside the body because they won't work properly. They're outside the body in this little bag, which we would call the scrotum down here. Okay, so there it is. The scrotum, as we said already, the scrotum holds the testes outside the body at a temperature of less than 37 degrees. Okay, so I can't get rid of this print here. I can't get rid of anything on this thing. Let me just check. No, it doesn't work. Okay. Now, so it holds the testes outside the body at a temperature of less than 37 degrees. That is what we call best for sperm production. Okay, so that's the reason why the testes are held outside the body. Now, the sperm duct. Duct is the name for a tube, okay? And the sperm duct is nothing more than the tube here that brings the sperm cells, let me just follow it here, from the testes down and out of the body to the penis. Okay, so that's what the sperm duct does. It basically carries the sperm from the place where they're made, the testes, through the body and out of the body during intercourse, which is the way by which the gamete of the male is transferred to the gamete of the female. Okay. Now, there are glands. If you notice that little trip I took around here, there are glands just in here. Now, it's very hard to see them, but they're just in there. Let me just take that line off and let's see if I can see a little bit better. They're here. So you notice the tube, if I follow that again, the tube comes up and around to here. And then when it reaches this part, see there? There are glands. And what these glands do is they make a liquid called semen. And that liquid, or seminal fluid I should say, that seminal fluid is then added to the sperm cells and it makes a liquid which we call semen. Okay, and it's the semen then that nourishes the sperm cells, carries food for them because they have a long journey ahead of them. So they're put into this liquid, they're nourished, and they're also then, obviously because they swim, it's a good medium for them to swim in. So normally the sperm cells leave here, they're joined with liquids from this gland, what we would call seminal fluid. There it is there. And then the seminal fluid, together with the sperm cells from the testes, leave the body as what we call semen. That's the mix of sperm and seminal fluid. And finally then, we have the penis. And the penis here is simply carries out the sperm from the body. That's all it does. It carries out sperm from the body, and also it delivers urine out of the body as well. But its main function is to take the sperm cells from here that have been mixed with the seminal fluid to form semen, out of the body during intercourse, and that's how the male transfers his gametes. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts of the male reproductive system that we need to know well. So we'll go through them again quickly. The testes, they make the male gamete called the sperm cell. The testes are held outside the body in a little bag of flesh which we call the scrotum, and the reason for that is to keep the testes at a temperature of lower than 37 degrees, where they work best. Okay, when the testes make the sperm cells are then brought up through this little, what we would call sperm duct, and it's mixed with liquids here that we call seminal fluid. Okay, and the seminal fluid together with the sperm cells make semen, which is then during intercourse brought out of the body through the penis. Okay, the penis itself then, as we said, carries the sperm cells out during intercourse and delivers the male gamete into the female body, where it then makes its way up through the female body to meet the female gamete, or the egg, in an act of fertilization. So that's the male reproductive system. You do have to know the parts that are on that. There's a little quiz coming up at the end that will bring you to this, be able to match them up and make sure you understand them well. Okay. So, what happens to the female in puberty? Now, you'll notice here again, it all starts with the little gland in the brain, just there. And this little pituitary gland, this time, sends a hormone into the blood, which triggers the ovaries. Okay, and the ovaries are internal. They're not like the testes. The testes are held outside. The ovaries are inside, all right, round about the hip bone. So these little ovaries, when they get a message from the pituitary gland, they switch on and they start to make estrogen. This is the hormone here. And what estrogen does when it gets into the blood is it causes the change of girl to woman. It causes the female changes, okay? And those changes that take place normally take place between 10 and 13. I shouldn't say normally, on average take place between 10 and 13. Some people are before, some people are after. It happens, and it happens in its own time between the ages of 10 and 13 on average, but it can, as we said before, happen before or happen afterwards. A widening of the pelvis and a growth of the breasts. Now, the reason why estrogen brings about these two, these are joined, these are together in their functionality. The pelvis becomes wider because that's where the baby is going to grow over 9 months. So there must be space in there, okay? So the male doesn't need a wide pelvis, but the female does. And what happens is the female pelvis actually widens in response to the estrogen, making more space between the hip bones for the development of the baby, okay? And then obviously the growth of breasts. Well, that's to feed the child once the child is born, okay? What we call them, they're also called mammary glands. Mammary glands. And mammary glands make milk, okay? And it's the mammalian milk that is the best form of food you can give a newborn child for the first number of months of its life, because it contains everything the child needs for the best start in life and for the healthiest start in life. Also, growth of hair on the body, okay? The growth of the uterus. Now, the uterus is another name for the womb. And the womb, obviously, is the space inside which the baby will grow over 9 months before it then contracts and pushes the child out, down through the uterus, down through the vagina, and out into the world as a new human being. The ovaries also then begin to make egg cells. Now, I shouldn't say make egg cells, because really and truly, girls are born with a full complement of eggs. Okay, you have all your egg cells in your ovaries the moment you're born, the females. So they don't make them, but what they start to do is they start to release them. And they release one from each ovary roughly once every 28 days. Okay, that's what we call the menstrual cycle, which we will look in detail with after this chapter. Okay, but there's the changes. So first of all, a widening of the pelvis, the growth of breast tissue, growth of hair on the body, the growth of the uterus, and then the ovaries beginning to release the egg cells that they have in there. Now, they're very immature before puberty, very immature. So what the estrogen does also is it tells the ovaries to start telling the egg cells to mature, so they get a little bit bigger. And then when they get bigger, they actually pop out of the side of the ovary. They release the egg into the female body, where if there's sperm cells present, they will meet and fertilization will take place. So what about the female reproductive system? Where does the female reproductive system fit into the scheme of things? And again, you'll notice we have two very important structures either side of the womb itself. They are the ovaries, okay? And what does the ovary do? It produces the gametes. So this is where you have special cells which only have half the amount of genetic information, and they are stored in the ovaries, not made, they're stored in there. And what happens is, once a month it's on the left hand side, the next month it's released from the right hand side, left hand side, right hand side. And there are some people who actually say that you can feel the moment when the egg is actually released from the ovary, that it's that kind of powerful that people can feel it, or it might be a sharp pain, or it could be some other symbol or sign that the ovary has been released, or the ovary has released an egg into this tube here. Now remember, on the male reproductive system, what did the testes do? They made the male gamete. Where did the male gametes go? They went into a sperm duct, they went into a tube. So when the egg is released, where does it actually go? And the answer is, it kind of sucked into this tube here. These are like fingers, and they keep wafting like this. And what they do is they pull the egg cell in so that it'll travel down this tube here towards the womb. And that tube that will catch the egg when it's released and carry it down to the uterus or down to the womb is called the fallopian tube, okay? And the fallopian tube only has one job, and that's to guide the egg from the ovary down to the uterus, down to the womb. Now, how does it do that? And you'll see this in one of the videos I've set up later on. The egg, of course, doesn't move. It doesn't have a tail. But what happens is, when the egg is released, there are tiny little hairs like that inside the fallopian tube. And what they do is they actually kick the egg along, and they waft it along, so that when it gets into the fallopian tube, it's wafted along the fallopian tube down towards the uterus, okay? If there are sperm cells present, normally here is the area where fertilization will take place. So the egg is normally fertilized before it enters the uterus. And that's important, because if it's fertilized in here, then a little message is sent to the brain to tell the uterus to hold on to the egg, to catch it when it comes in and nourish it and embed it and allow the child to grow. So the ovary produces the gamete, which we call the egg, or the ovum, as some of you had in your previous exam, the ovum. It is released into the fallopian tube, and the fallopian tube simply guides it down towards the uterus, where, if sperm cells are present, fertilization will take place, and if sperm cells are not present, it just carries on down and out of the body. Okay, we'll talk about that later on. So there's your fallopian tubes, and there's two of them, left and right, one for each ovary. And finally then, you have the uterus, which is the place where the baby develops for 9 months. Notice how thick the walls are. It's a very, very thick, muscular area. And the reason why it's muscular is because it's the uterus that's going to push the child out after 9 months. Okay, 9 months is up, you've had your free lodgings, out. What happens? The uterine muscles begin to contract, and they begin to push the baby downwards, out through the uterus and into the world. And finally, the tube down here that brings the baby out of the world, but also brings the child, or the sperm cells, into the female body, is called the vagina. Okay, and the vagina is an opening that allows sperm cells to enter, so the sperm can enter, but the baby can also pass out into the world. All right, so it has two functions. First of all, it'll hold the penis during intercourse. It'll allow for the deposition of sperm cells here, close to the opening of the uterus, which we call the cervix. All right, that's the first job it has. And then the second job is simply to allow the child out from the uterus, out of the body, into the world. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts of the female reproductive system as well. Always start off with the ovaries. The ovaries produce the gametes, okay, the egg cells, or the ovum. The egg cells moved into the fallopian tube. The fallopian tube moves the egg along into the uterus. The uterus is where the child develops for 9 months, and the uterus is then what does the pushing to put the child out into the world afterwards. The cervix is the opening. It's just here. It's the opening of the uterus, and below the cervix then you have the vagina, which is nothing more than a tunnel which holds the penis during copulation or intercourse, and also then allows the baby out into the world during the birth process. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, there's a lot of detail in there, a lot of detail that you need to remember. So I'm going to ask you between now and Thursday to work through these 4 tests, okay, or quizzes or questions. Maybe the best thing to do will be to take, take the first 2 and the second 2 together. So you have from now till Thursday. All right, so I want you to get the 4 of these done. You do have to write all the questions and answers into your copy. This has to go into your copy. All right, you don't have to draw any diagrams, but you do have to write down the questions with the correct answers. So spread them out. Do maybe, today's Tuesday, do 2 on Tuesday, maybe 2 on Wednesday, but they have to be done on Thursday, because on Thursday then we'll take a small while in the live class to move through some of these questions to make sure that nobody has any difficulties with them. So maybe take these on Tuesday and these on Wednesday. Or as I might say, that one there is probably the longest. If you want to do it, if you want to do this one on Tuesday, if you just want to do that and leave the other 3, they're fairly short. Okay, so you can do 2 and 2 or 1 and 3. I don't mind which, but the answers have to go into your copy. And then we'll come back on Thursday. We'll only have maybe a 15-minute live class just to make sure that we've got the answers to these things correct. And then when that live class is over, we'll move on to the next section, which looks at the female reproductive system in far more detail and how detailed it is in terms of egg release, in terms of pregnancy, and in terms of birth.